Thank you for joining me today. I thought we'd do something a little different for this project. As you may remember, I used some of my own sand texture paste on a painting recently, and I had some left over which kept very nicely. So I've actually covered this small canvas. It's only a 10 by 12 and it's now dry. You can probably see that there are some lines on this. I've been out in my garden and selected some of my ivy leaves that have fallen. I really quite like ivy. It's one of my favourite sort of plants, and I'm actually going to use these as a template. So instead of worrying about whether you can draw and whether you get the dimensions right, use them to draw around roughly. You don't need to worry about getting them exact, and it's a great start for a picture. The next part, after you've done that, is literally with your acrylic paints in whatever colours you desire. I've chosen some very nice sort of autumn brick colours, ground colours, whichever you want to think of. And here I'm mixing some really nice burnt sienna with a very dark Prussian blue, and it makes the most wonderful browny sort of grey, really interesting colour for adding depth. And now it's just a question of filling in, being careful to paint around the lines that you've drawn with your HB pencil or whichever pencil you really use. The pencil marks will stay on as long as you're careful. Now here I'm starting to pick out some little bits of what look like leaves, even though they're not intentional leaves. So to give depth, I've actually used colour underneath, a darker shade, to start to pick out those little bits of colour. That's where the texture comes in. And here I'm just wetting a little area, and I'm actually using those beautiful acrylic inks that I've used on a previous painting because they're so vibrant, so bright, so cheerful. They lend themselves really well to this. So I'm using the yellow and the burnt sienna, which is a transparent. To put the water on first means that it spreads really nicely, and then you can go in with your brush and push it around even more. It blends so beautifully onto the canvas. This has already been primed with some white gesso, so it's quite well sealed. And then you can just keep on blending, adding the colours. Remember that underneath the leaves there'll be a little bit of darker areas where the shadow is. But basically build up using your inks, your acrylic paint. I've used quite a nice soft flat brush to blend. And now we're getting to the point where the leaves have been partially painted. Obviously I've used matching colours to the ivy leaves that I've collected, and it literally is working around the texture and just putting it where you feel it wants to be. It can be quite abstract. You've got the shape of the leaves, so you know what you're working with, and it's just a question of paint them in as you wish. Couldn't really be easier, and without having to worry about the drawing, you've already got a head start on yourself if perhaps you were a little bit anxious about doing this. And all ivy leaves are slightly different, so there's nobody going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. What I've done is try to blend some of the edges away so that we've got dark areas under some bits and then almost an abstract flowing into the water of the paint just to take away some of the harder edges. You can recapture hard and soft edges in lots of different ways, but you can see there's implications of leaves, little bits of structures. And now is the fun part. I'm actually going to add some acrylic pearlescent gold inks over the top and also a pearlescent green. Both, one's Daler-Rowney and one is Liquitex. I'm actually wetting the texture first with just some clean water. And then I'm just going to put some of the green, which is very pale, almost a whitish green, with the brush, and it will soak in where the water is. Really good fun to experiment, to pick out little bits of highlights, just to add that lovely interest. And now I'm just dropping some of the gold in. This has two uses. It will give you highlights, and it will also fill in any little bits of texture that you've not managed to cover with paint. Because the ink is so thin, it will soak in, and all those little areas will now be covered with beautiful shimmering paints to complement the acrylics that you've put on beforehand. So you'll have a really beautiful, very autumnal, very shiny picture, depending on how much you put on. That area particularly had a few little white areas that will now just be covered with this beautiful gold. It will really catch the eye, and I think you'll enjoy producing something with this method It doesn't have to be ivy leaves, you could use any type of shapes that you find, anything that you want to use as a template. Go ahead, give it a try, see how it comes out. I'm sure you'll find that once you've got the actual shape drawn on, then we just put in a little bit onto the brush to brush that on there so that we don't get too much. You'll really enjoy doing this, and I really hope that it's something that inspires you to try, rather than worrying about the drawing process, which I know a lot of people do worry about. So have a go, make your own beautiful textured acrylic abstract autumn painting or summer painting. Here in the UK we're starting to get these colours in now, so it's really nice to see. And again, just using a brush to apply, a little bit easier to direct, and just taking the colour up to various corners and embellishing where you wish. I think one of the most fun parts of these texture paintings is actually this part where you start to embellish the colours that you've got and really pick out that gorgeous texture. It almost looks like stems that are coming out from beneath the leaves, little bits of twigs, branches, whatever you see them as. You can add highlights onto those to pick them out as well. You can use your fingers if you need to. Just make it as beautiful as you want and enjoy the process. Here we have our beautiful finished painting. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with your comments and feedback or any questions, and I hope to see you again next time. Many thanks. Bye bye.